Sometimes the hardest knock on your door is the one that might save your life. That thought would come to Marcus Bennett much later, long after the headlights had faded from his quiet street, and long after the envelope had changed the way he looked at the word debt. But on this night, Marcus Bennett was not thinking about miracles. He was thinking about numbers. The kitchen clock above the refrigerator blinked 9:12 p.m. in dull green light, the kind that made a small room feel even quieter. Marcus sat at the old wooden table with a pencil resting between his fingers, surrounded by envelopes that all seemed to say the same thing in different fonts. Past due. Electric bill. Hospital balance. Credit notice. A final warning printed in bold red letters that didn't look angry, just tired of asking. The pencil tapped lightly against the paper as he added the numbers again, slower this time, as if patience might somehow change the result. It didn't. $84,230. Marcus leaned back in the chair and rubbed his face with both hands. The chair creaked beneath his weight, the same creak it had made every night for the past 2 years. Across the small living room, the television glowed softly with the volume turned almost all the way down. On the couch beneath a worn blue blanket, 8-year-old Eli Bennett slept curled on his side, one arm wrapped around a plastic dinosaur that had lost one of its legs months ago. The kid could sleep through anything. Marcus envied that. Outside the small house in Columbus, Ohio, the street was quiet in the way working-class neighborhoods often are after dark. Porch lights flickered on one by one. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The faint hum of a passing car rolled through the distance like a low tide and disappeared. Marcus reached for the top envelope again, even though he had already read it 3 times. Notice of property review. The wording was careful, professional, polite in a way that almost felt worse than anger. He turned the page slowly and stared at the line that mattered. Possible foreclosure review within 30 days. 30 days. Marcus exhaled through his nose and looked toward the living room again. Eli shifted slightly, mumbling something in his sleep that sounded like the word rocket. The boy had been building a cardboard spaceship all afternoon from an old cereal box. Marcus had helped tape the wings on before dinner, promising that they'd paint it tomorrow. Tomorrow. That word carried more weight than it should. Marcus picked up the pencil again, drawing a slow line beneath the final number on the page. $84,230. The accident at the warehouse had happened 14 months earlier, but the numbers were still growing like weeds in dry soil. Medical bills. Legal forms. Fees that seemed to multiply every time another letter arrived. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, letting the quiet stretch across the room. He didn't hear the car at first. Most people on Maple Ridge Street drove pickup trucks or aging sedans that rattled a little when they passed. This sound was different. Smooth. Quiet. Expensive in a way you could hear even before you saw it. Marcus opened his eyes slowly as a soft wash of headlights slid across the kitchen wall and stopped in front of his house. He frowned slightly. No one visited this late, especially not in a car that sounded like that. The engine shut off. Silence returned, thicker now. Marcus pushed his chair back and stood, stepping toward the small window beside the sink. Outside, beneath the yellow streetlight, a long black sedan sat at the curb like it had taken a wrong turn into the wrong neighborhood. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. Tall, straight posture, white coat catching the light. She closed the door gently, not the way someone unfamiliar with a neighborhood might. Not rushed, not nervous, just precise. Marcus watched her walk up the short path toward the porch like she had already decided exactly where she was supposed to be. He frowned again. A few seconds later, the knock came. Not loud, not hesitant, just 3 calm taps against the wood. Marcus stood very still in the kitchen, staring at the door. Then he glanced once more toward Eli sleeping on the couch. The knock came again, and something in Marcus's chest told him that whoever was standing on the other side of that door hadn't come by mistake. Marcus Bennett stood still for a moment after the second knock, listening to the quiet that followed it. The house felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls themselves were waiting for him to move. He walked toward the front door slowly. Each step measured across the worn wooden floor. The porch light outside cast a faint glow through the frosted glass panel, outlining the silhouette of the woman standing there. She did not move. She did not check her phone or glance down the street. She simply waited. Marcus reached the door and rested his hand on the handle without turning it. For a brief second, he considered pretending no one was home. People with expensive cars rarely knocked twice unless they were certain they had the right address. The thought lingered only a moment. Marcus exhaled quietly and opened the door. Cool night air slipped inside the house along with the faint scent of rain somewhere far away. The woman standing on the porch looked exactly as composed up close as she had from the window. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with calm eyes and the kind of posture that came from years of walking into rooms where everyone expected her to speak first. A tailored ivory coat rested neatly over a dark dress, and a slim leather folder was tucked beneath one arm. She studied Marcus for a brief moment, not with judgment, but with careful recognition, as if confirming something she had already read about him. "Mr. Marcus Bennett," she said. Her voice was steady and clear, the voice of someone accustomed to being heard without raising it. Marcus blinked once. "Yes, ma'am." The woman offered a small polite nod. "My name is Charlotte Whitmore." Marcus recognized the name immediately, even though he wished he did not. Whitmore Capital appeared on the letterheads of two of the envelopes still sitting on his kitchen table. He felt a quiet weight settle in his chest. The woman reached into the leather folder and removed a slim business card, extending it toward him with calm precision. Marcus took it slowly. The card was thick, bright white, the lettering simple and sharp. Charlotte Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer, Whitmore Capital Holdings. Marcus glanced up from the card to the woman again, uncertain what expression to wear. "If you are here about the account," he said carefully, "I already spoke with someone on the phone last month. They said I had a little time." Charlotte Whitmore did not immediately respond. Instead, she looked past him briefly toward the soft glow of the living room where Eli still slept beneath the blanket. Her eyes softened for just a second before returning to Marcus. "May I come inside for a moment, Mr. Bennett?" she asked. "This conversation will be easier at a table." Marcus hesitated. It had been a long time since someone dressed like her had stepped onto his porch, and something about the situation felt strangely out of place. But her tone carried no pressure, no impatience, only quiet certainty. He stepped aside and opened the door wider. The kitchen light reflected gently against the polished wood floor as Charlotte Whitmore entered the house. She moved through the doorway without looking around in curiosity the way strangers often did. Her attention stayed on Marcus as he closed the door behind her. The house returned to its quiet again. Marcus gestured toward the kitchen table where the envelopes were still spread across the surface like a map of everything that had gone wrong in the past year. Charlotte Whitmore set the leather folder down beside them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus noticed something unexpected. The woman was not looking at the bills. She was looking at him. Marcus Bennett noticed the silence stretching between them, the kind of silence that usually came right before someone delivered bad news in a careful voice. He rested both hands on the edge of the kitchen table, standing across from Charlotte Whitmore while the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the room. For a moment, she continued studying him with a quiet attentiveness that felt unusual for someone who controlled the fate of debts and balance sheets. Finally, she reached into the leather folder and placed a thick envelope on the table. The paper slid softly across the wood until it stopped beside the stack of bills Marcus had been reviewing earlier that evening. "Mr. Bennett," she said calmly, "I am aware of the amount you currently owe." Marcus let out a slow breath through his nose. $84,230, he replied quietly. Charlotte Whitmore nodded once. "That is correct." Marcus pulled out the chair and sat down heavily. The chair creaked beneath him again, the familiar sound almost comforting now that the numbers had been spoken out loud. "I have been trying to keep up with the minimum payments," he said, glancing briefly at the envelopes spread across the table. "I know I fell behind after the surgery bills started stacking up, but I am working again. Part-time, but it is something." Charlotte Whitmore did not interrupt. She simply listened. Marcus rubbed his palms together slowly, as if warming them beside a fire that was not there. "If you are here to tell me the house is being reviewed," he continued, "I already read the notice. 30 days. I saw it." Charlotte Whitmore tilted her head slightly. "That notice is what brought me here tonight," she said. Marcus gave a tired half-smile that carried no humor. Most companies usually send a lawyer for that part. Charlotte Whitmore looked down at the envelope on the table for a moment before sliding it closer to him. "Please open it, Mr. Bennett." Marcus hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the living room again, where Eli slept peacefully beneath the blanket. unaware that adults were quietly discussing the future of the home he had grown up in. Marcus finally reached for the envelope and broke the seal carefully. The paper inside felt heavier than he expected. Several printed pages slid out onto the table. He scanned the first page slowly. Then he stopped. His eyebrows pulled together. "That does not look right," he murmured. Charlotte Whitmore folded her hands lightly in front of her. "Which part, Mr. Bennett?" Marcus tapped the page with one finger. "This says Whitmore Capital acquired the logistics company that owned the warehouse where I worked." "That happened 2 months ago," Charlotte Whitmore replied. Marcus nodded slowly as he continued reading. The kitchen clock ticked softly behind him. A full minute passed before Marcus looked up again. There was confusion in his eyes now. "This report says the accident investigation was reopened during the acquisition review." Charlotte Whitmore nodded once more. "That is correct." Marcus leaned back slightly in the chair. "But the company closed that case last year," he said. "They said the responsibility was mine. They said the equipment failure happened because I ignored the safety notice." Charlotte Whitmore held his gaze with quiet steadiness. "Yes," she said softly. "That is what the report claimed." Marcus looked back down at the page in front of him again. His finger traced a line halfway down the document before stopping. Then he read the sentence again slowly, almost under his breath. "Internal maintenance record discrepancy discovered during financial audit." Marcus looked up at Charlotte Whitmore with a puzzled expression. "What does that mean?" Charlotte Whitmore did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached forward and gently turned the next page toward him. "It means, Mr. Bennett, that someone changed the story after the accident happened." Marcus Bennett stared at the sentence on the page as if the words might rearrange themselves into something easier to understand. The kitchen light hummed softly above them, casting a warm circle over the table where the papers rested. For a long moment, he did not speak. Then he slowly lifted his eyes towards Charlotte Whitmore. "Someone changed the story," he repeated quietly. Charlotte Whitmore gave a small nod. "Yes." Marcus leaned back in the chair again, his hands resting flat on the table now. The lines on his face deepened slightly as memories moved through his mind. The warehouse floor, the sound of machinery, the long meeting in the supervisor office the week after the accident when 3 managers sat across from him and spoke in careful legal language. They told him the safety override had been ignored. They told him the incident report showed his authorization code on the system. They told him the company could not accept responsibility. Marcus remembered the moment he signed the final document because he had been too exhausted to argue anymore. "That report has been closed for over a year," he said slowly. Charlotte Whitmore folded her hands together. "It was closed publicly," she replied. Marcus frowned slightly. "Publicly?" Charlotte Whitmore slid another page from the folder and placed it beside the report he had been reading. "During our acquisition review 2 months ago," she said, "our auditors began reviewing every maintenance record from the previous 5 years. That process uncovered something unusual." Marcus lowered his eyes to the new page. Rows of numbers and maintenance codes filled the document like a quiet language he had once spoken fluently. His finger moved down the page slowly. He stopped near the middle and leaned closer. "That inspection log is wrong," he murmured. Charlotte Whitmore watched him carefully. "How so?" Marcus tapped the line twice. "The hydraulic press was scheduled for a maintenance shutdown 2 days before the accident. I remember that because I signed the request myself." Charlotte Whitmore nodded once. "Our records show that the shutdown request was canceled at 9:42 in the evening the night before the incident." Marcus looked up sharply. "I did not cancel anything." Charlotte Whitmore met his eyes without hesitation. "That is what our investigation suggests as well." Marcus looked back at the document again, scanning the timestamp printed beside the entry. 9:42 p.m. He shook his head slowly. "I was already home at that time. Eli had a school project that night. We were building a model volcano out of baking soda and vinegar." He paused as the memory settled in his voice. "The kitchen smelled like science class for 2 days." Charlotte Whitmore allowed a faint smile to appear for a moment before it faded again. "The system log shows your employee code authorizing the override," she said. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. That code was stored in the main console at the warehouse. Anyone with supervisor clearance could have used it. Charlotte Whitmore nodded again. "That detail appears in the internal notes as well." Marcus leaned forward slightly, studying the page as if he could uncover the missing piece through patience alone. "So someone used my code," he said quietly. Charlotte Whitmore spoke carefully. "It appears that way." Marcus exhaled slowly. The sound carried years of frustration he had long ago tried to bury beneath quiet acceptance. And the company decided it was easier to blame the guy who worked the night shift, he said. Charlotte Whitmore did not respond immediately. The refrigerator hummed again behind them while the clock moved another minute forward. Finally, she said softly, "Mr. Bennett, there is one more detail you need to see." She reached into the folder and removed a final document, sliding it across the table toward him. This one was shorter. Only a single page. Marcus looked down and read the heading. Internal Financial Liability Review. Beneath it was a single sentence highlighted in gray. Marcus read it twice before lifting his eyes again. According to this report, he said slowly, the company knew about the equipment defect weeks before the accident. Charlotte Whitmore nodded once. Yes. Marcus sat back in the chair, the paper still in his hand. The quiet kitchen suddenly felt very different than it had 10 minutes earlier. Then why did they say the failure was my responsibility? He asked. Charlotte Whitmore held his gaze steadily and answered in the same calm voice she had used since. Arriving at the house. Because it was cheaper that way. Marcus Bennett did not move for several seconds after hearing Charlotte Whitmore's answer. Because it was cheaper that way. The words settled over the kitchen table like dust after a long-forgotten storm. Marcus looked down again at the single sheet of paper in his hands. The sentence did not change the second time he read it, nor the third. Internal Financial Liability Review. Equipment defect acknowledged prior to incident. Estimated repair cost $280,000. Liability reassigned following internal adjustment. Marcus slowly lowered the page back onto the table. For a moment, he only listened to the quiet rhythm of the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Each second seemed to stretch longer than the one before. So they knew, he said finally. Charlotte Whitmore nodded once. Yes. Marcus leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling as if the small cracks in the plaster might explain something the documents could not. 14 months ago, he had sat in a different room with different lighting and a different table, listening to men in polished suits explain that accidents happened and that sometimes responsibility was complicated. He remembered the folder they placed in front of him that day. He remembered how heavy the word negligence had looked on the page. Marcus lowered his gaze again and looked at Charlotte Whitmore. And they decided it was easier to say, I ignored the warning. Charlotte Whitmore did not argue. The investigation summary suggests the company reassigned responsibility to avoid a larger financial claim. Marcus gave a quiet laugh that carried no humor at all. $84,000 in debt felt large enough to me. Charlotte Whitmore remained calm. I understand that. Marcus rubbed his palms slowly across his jeans, thinking about the past year in fragments. The hospital hallway that smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. The stack of medical invoices that arrived before he was even cleared to return home. The job interviews that ended politely the moment the background check mentioned an unresolved safety violation. The way Eli had once asked why they stopped buying his favorite cereal with the astronaut on the box. Marcus exhaled slowly and looked toward the living room again. The boy still slept peacefully beneath the blanket, one arm hanging loosely off the couch. He does not know about any of this, Marcus said quietly. Charlotte Whitmore followed his glance. About the accident. About the money. Marcus shook his head. To him it is just a house with a squeaky door and pancakes on Sunday mornings. Charlotte Whitmore was silent for a moment. Then she looked back at the documents on the table. Mr. Bennett, she said carefully, I did not come here tonight simply to explain what happened. Marcus studied her face. The calm confidence was still there, but now there was something else beneath it. Something closer to determination. What did you come here for then? He asked. Charlotte Whitmore reached into the leather folder once more and removed a final sheet of paper that Marcus had not yet seen. She placed it gently beside the others. This document was different. No dense paragraphs. No technical codes. Just a single typed statement near the center of the page. Marcus leaned forward and read it slowly. Proposed financial correction pending executive approval. Debt reassessment authorized under corporate liability review. Marcus looked up again, confusion returning to his eyes. What does that mean? Charlotte Whitmore met his gaze without hesitation. It means the debt attached to your name should not exist. Marcus stared at her. The refrigerator hummed again in the background while the clock advanced another quiet second. And Charlotte Whitmore spoke the sentence that had brought her to his door that night. We are going to remove it. Marcus Bennett did not respond immediately after Charlotte Whitmore spoke the words. We are going to remove it. The sentence lingered in the air between them as quietly as the ticking clock on the wall. For a moment Marcus simply looked at her, studying her expression the way a man studies the sky before deciding whether a storm is truly passing or only pausing. Then he leaned forward slightly and looked back down at the document again. The page did not change. The words remained exactly where they had been a few seconds earlier. Proposed financial correction pending executive approval. Debt reassessment authorized under corporate liability review. Marcus slowly rested both hands on the table. That is not something people usually say to someone like me, he said quietly. Charlotte Whitmore did not appear offended. Someone like you, she asked calmly. Marcus gave a small tired smile. Someone who spent the last 14 months answering phone calls from collections departments. Someone who has learned that when a letter arrives it usually means the problem just got bigger. Charlotte Whitmore nodded slightly, as if she understood the logic. That is exactly why I am here in person instead of sending another letter, she replied. Marcus looked toward the stack of envelopes again. Most of those came with phrases like final notice and immediate response required. Charlotte Whitmore folded her hands gently, and none of them explained what actually happened. Marcus sat back again, his eyes drifting briefly toward the living room. Eli turned slightly under the blanket, but did not wake. The boy's dinosaur toy slid from his hand and landed softly against the couch cushion. Marcus watched him for a moment before returning his attention to the table. Removing a debt like this is not a small decision, he said. Charlotte Whitmore shook her head slightly. No, it is not. Marcus studied her again. Then why would a company do it? Charlotte Whitmore answered without hesitation. Because the debt was created through an error in responsibility. When that happens, the correction must follow the truth. Marcus considered that answer carefully. Over the past year, he had heard many explanations from many different voices, but none of them had ever used the word truth. He reached for the report again and ran his finger slowly along the lines describing the equipment defect. The numbers suddenly felt lighter than they had earlier that evening. Still heavy, but no longer impossible. And the company agreed to this, he asked. Charlotte Whitmore's voice remained steady. The final authorization requires my signature. Marcus blinked once. Your signature? Charlotte Whitmore nodded. I am the executive responsible for the acquisition review. Marcus leaned back once more. So you drove all the way out here tonight just to tell me that? Charlotte Whitmore allowed the smallest hint of a smile. Not exactly. Marcus waited. Charlotte Whitmore gestured toward the document in front of him. The policy requires one more step before the correction becomes official. Marcus frowned slightly. What step? Charlotte Whitmore slid a pen across the table and placed it beside the paper. Your acknowledgement that the original liability assignment was inaccurate. Marcus stared at the pen. It looked ordinary. Plastic body. Blue ink. Nothing remarkable about it at all. Yet the moment carried a quiet gravity that filled the entire kitchen. 14 months earlier he had signed another document in another office that had quietly changed his life in the opposite direction. Marcus looked up at Charlotte Whitmore again. And if I sign this, he asked slowly, the $84,000 disappears. Charlotte Whitmore held his gaze without blinking. Yes. Marcus rested his hand on the pen, but did not lift it yet. Because the truth finally replaces the mistake. Marcus Bennett kept his hand resting on the pen, but did not pick it up right away. The small plastic pen lay on the table between the documents like a quiet test of patience. For a long moment he simply looked at it, then at the paper, then back at Charlotte Whitmore. The kitchen clock continued its steady rhythm behind him. Tick, tick, tick. The sound had never seemed so loud before. 14 months earlier he had signed a document in another office under bright fluorescent lights, while 3 company representatives watched from across a polished conference table. That signature had quietly followed him through every bill, every rejected job application, every sleepless night when he wondered how long he could keep the house. Marcus lowered his eyes again and read the page one more time. Acknowledgement of incorrect liability assignment. Corporate correction pending executive authorization. The language was formal and precise, but the meaning was simple enough. He lifted the pen slowly and rolled it once between his fingers. Charlotte Whitmore did not rush him. She remained seated calmly across the table, her hands folded lightly together as if time itself had agreed to slow down for this moment. Marcus glanced toward the living room again. Eli had shifted onto his back now, the blue blanket half tangled around his legs. The dinosaur toy rested near his shoulder. The boy's breathing was slow and even. Marcus watched him for a second before speaking. You know, he said quietly, the first letter about this debt arrived the same week he started second grade. Charlotte Whitmore listened without interrupting. Marcus leaned back slightly in the chair, the pen still turning gently between his fingers. He asked me that night why I looked tired all the time. I told him grown-ups sometimes have problems that take a little while to fix. Charlotte Whitmore nodded softly. That sounds like something a father would say. Marcus gave a faint smile that carried both pride and exhaustion. I did not want him worrying about things he could not change. He looked down at the paper again. Funny thing is, I spent a year believing I could not change it either. Charlotte Whitmore spoke carefully. Most people would have believed the same. Marcus rested the pen on the page, but still did not sign. Instead, he looked directly at her. Why did you keep looking into the case? Charlotte Whitmore considered the question for a moment. Because the numbers did not make sense at first, she said. Marcus raised one eyebrow slightly. Numbers usually make sense to people who run investment firms. Charlotte Whitmore allowed a small nod. Exactly. The equipment repair cost was $280,000. The liability transferred to you was $84,230. Marcus frowned slightly. That is less money for the company. Charlotte Whitmore tilted her head. Yes, but it also meant accepting that a mechanical failure had occurred inside their safety system. Marcus understood immediately, and companies do not like admitting that. Charlotte Whitmore met his gaze steadily. Not when there is a simpler story available. Marcus tapped the pen lightly against the document once. The quiet sound echoed in the still room. Then he looked back toward the living room where Eli slept peacefully, completely unaware that the future of their home was resting on a single sheet of paper. Marcus finally placed the tip of the pen against the signature line. The ink flowed smoothly as he wrote his name in careful letters. Marcus Bennett. When he finished, he set the pen down beside the page and leaned back slightly. Charlotte Whitmore reached forward and lifted the document, reviewing the signature briefly before sliding it into the folder. Then she opened the folder again and placed a second page beside it. This one was already signed. Marcus noticed the elegant handwriting at the bottom immediately. Charlotte Whitmore. He looked up in quiet surprise. Charlotte Whitmore closed the folder and gave a small nod. Now the correction is complete. Marcus Bennett watched as Charlotte Whitmore closed the leather folder and rested her hand on top of it, the movement calm and final in a way that made the entire kitchen feel different. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet no longer carried the same weight it had earlier that evening. The stack of envelopes still sat on the table, but they looked smaller now, like old photographs that had lost their power to define the present. Marcus leaned back slowly in his chair and let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding for months. It felt strange. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just lighter. The clock continued its steady ticking above the refrigerator, but the sound no longer seemed like a countdown. Charlotte Whitmore stood from her chair and gently placed the folder back under her arm. The correction will appear in the system by morning, she said. Marcus looked up at her. Morning. The word sounded almost unfamiliar. So the letters stopped coming, he asked quietly. Charlotte Whitmore nodded. The account attached to your name will show a zero balance. Marcus studied her face carefully, as if confirming that the sentence belonged to reality and not to wishful thinking. Zero. Charlotte Whitmore gave a small confirming nod. Zero. Marcus looked toward the living room again where Eli was beginning to stir slightly beneath the blanket. The boy shifted onto his side and rubbed his eyes with the sleepy confusion of someone waking in the middle of the night. Eli sat up slowly on the couch and blinked toward the kitchen light. Dad, he mumbled softly, his voice thick with sleep. Marcus turned in his chair immediately. Hey buddy. Eli squinted toward the table and noticed the unfamiliar woman standing near the doorway. His small eyebrows lifted in quiet curiosity rather than fear. Are we having a meeting? He asked. Marcus could not help smiling. Something like that. Eli swung his legs off the couch and padded across the living room in his socks, the dinosaur toy still clutched loosely in his hand. He stopped beside Marcus and leaned against his arm. Charlotte Whitmore lowered herself slightly, so she was closer to his height. Hello, Eli, she said gently. Eli looked up at her with the direct honesty only children seem to carry. Hi. Marcus rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. This is Miss Whitmore. She stopped by to help us with some paperwork. Eli considered that for a moment. Is it the kind of paperwork that makes you stop frowning all the time? Marcus blinked in mild surprise while Charlotte Whitmore allowed a quiet laugh to escape. It might be exactly that kind, she said. Eli nodded, as if satisfied with the explanation, and looked up at Marcus again. So we are still keeping the house. Marcus felt something warm move through his chest. Yes, he said softly. We are keeping the house. Eli gave a sleepy grin and leaned his head briefly against Marcus's shoulder before wandering back toward the couch. As the boy climbed beneath the blanket again, Charlotte Whitmore walked slowly toward the door. Marcus followed her to the porch. The night air outside was cool and quiet beneath the streetlight. The long black sedan waited at the curb exactly where it had been earlier. Marcus looked at her for a moment before speaking. You could have handled this through lawyers and letters. Charlotte Whitmore paused beside the steps. Yes, she said, but some corrections deserve to be delivered face to face. Marcus nodded slowly. Then he said the only words that seemed large enough for the moment. Thank you. Charlotte Whitmore met his gaze for a second longer before offering a calm smile. Sometimes the truth simply needs someone willing to sign it. Marcus Bennett remained standing on the porch for a few seconds after Charlotte Whitmore stepped down toward the sidewalk. The night was quiet again, just as it had been before she arrived, but the silence no longer carried the same weight. The long black sedan waited under the streetlight while she opened the door and paused briefly before getting in. Marcus noticed the way she glanced back toward the house once more, not with curiosity, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finished a difficult task. Then the car door closed gently, and the engine started with a low, smooth sound that barely disturbed the calm of the neighborhood. The headlights swept across the small front yard as the car pulled away and disappeared slowly down Maple Ridge Street. Marcus remained on the porch until the red glow of the tail lights faded completely around the corner. The cool night air brushed softly across his face, carrying the faint scent of damp pavement and distant trees. For the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like a wall he had to climb. It felt more like a road that had finally been cleared. Marcus stepped back inside and closed the door quietly behind him. The kitchen looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. The same wooden table. The same refrigerator humming in the corner. The same stack of envelopes still resting where they had been. But something invisible had shifted in the space between those ordinary objects. Marcus walked slowly to the table and picked up the top envelope. The bold letters that once seemed heavy with warning now felt strangely powerless. He turned the envelope over once, then set it back down and pushed the entire stack aside. The clock on the wall read a few minutes past 10. In the living room, Eli had fallen asleep again, the dinosaur toy still tucked beside his shoulder. Marcus moved quietly across the room and pulled the blanket up over the boy's legs. Eli stirred slightly and murmured something that sounded like the word pancakes. Marcus smiled softly and rested a hand on the back of the couch for a moment. Tomorrow morning would arrive like any other morning in this house. The same sunlight through the kitchen window. The same cereal bowls on the counter. The same small conversation about school and science projects and whether dinosaurs could really outrun astronauts in space. But one quiet difference would exist beneath all of it. The number that had followed Marcus Bennett for 14 months would no longer exist. No phone calls. No letters. No weight attached to his name. Marcus returned to the kitchen and turned off the overhead light. Only the dim glow from the living room lamp remained now. He stood for a moment beside the table where the papers had been spread earlier that evening. It occurred to him that the most important moment of the night had not been the signature itself. It had been the decision behind it. Somewhere in an office miles away, a report had crossed someone's desk, and instead of ignoring it, someone had chosen to look closer. Marcus glanced toward the front door once more. Charlotte Whitmore had said that some corrections deserved to be delivered face to face. Marcus understood that now, because the truth did not arrive with fireworks or applause. It arrived quietly, like a knock on a door late at night. And sometimes that quiet knock was enough to change everything.